Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. A lot of big stories to talk to you about today. First of all, there are some big developments with regards to the war in Ukraine. We will bring you all of those updates. Also, some moves from the Fed. The president putting out an op-ed regarding his plan on inflation. He's also meeting with the Fed chair, so we'll talk to you about that. Some new developments just breaking this morning about what Democrats are planning to try to do with regards to guns and the strange position the White House is taking on all of this. We also have some developments on the lack of movement on the stock ban, which seemed to be gaining momentum. Some new indications that one Nancy Pelosi might be standing in the way of progress. I know you are all shocked to learn that. We'll talk to you about that. Also, bringing a little bit of Jon Stewart from Memorial Day, talking about the long overdue passage of some sort of relief for veterans who've been afflicted with various illnesses, including cancer, including death from exposure to toxic burn pits. So we'll tell you about that as well. We've got Jeff Stein back in the House detailing Biden's plans for student debt relief. But we do want to start with the war in Ukraine, some significant developments here. Let's go ahead and put this first piece up on the screen. So The Guardian reporting that Biden has said no to Ukraine in terms of supplying them with long-range rockets that can hit Russia. Let me go ahead and read you a little bit of this. They say the U.S. will not supply Ukraine with those rockets that can reach into Russia in an attempt to ease tensions with Moscow over the potential deployment of long-range missiles with a range of about 185 miles. The White House has been weighing pleas from Ukraine, which is losing ground in the battle for Donbas. Of course, that's that eastern separatist region of Ukraine, for multiple launch rocket systems to offset Moscow's increasingly effective use of long-range artillery. We are not going to send to Ukraine rocket systems that can strike into Russia, Biden told reporters. However, it is a little bit ambiguous exactly what he means there, because those U.S.-made systems come in many different variants. They say could fire missiles up to 185 miles away. Those definitely seem to be off the table, but there are also other rockets with shorter ranges of 20 to 40 miles. So exactly what that means is unclear. Go ahead and put this next tear sheet up on the screen, because the context here is really important. As I just referred to, things are not going well for Ukraine right now in the eastern part of the country in Donbas. Russia has just been shelling the hell out of that whole region. And the Ukrainians are saying that they are completely outgunned. Russia continues to make progress there. They've particularly focused on the city of Severodonetsk. That is the last major Ukrainian support in that region. The Russians have been working to try to encircle that city, which used to have about 100,000 civilians in it. Most civilians have fled the region at this point. And so Ukraine is saying to the U.S., we need more, we need more, we need more. Of course, the U.S. has already sent an extraordinary amount of arms, and Biden at least drawing the line with regards to these missiles that could clearly reach into Russia out of fear, something we've talked a lot about here, that Russia would see that as a direct threat and as a direct escalation and could put us in a direct conflict with them.
Yeah, his comments actually came after Medvedev, who was the Russian president, during that weird interim period where Putin was out. Medvedev said very clearly, he said, if these weapons are sent over, we will target the center of which they came from. I mean, you can interpret that of which they want. And this is part of the problem, too, with Russian bellicosity. They're always threatening nuclear war as if it's some sort of a joke, and showing their strength, that it's hard for us and probably for the White House, too, to say, like, well, where is the line here? Exactly. Clearly enough in Biden's mind that the Ukrainians at least may use those weapons, perhaps accidentally. This is always the problem with miscalculation. And from what I'm reading here, things are not going well for Ukraine in that battle in the Donbas. And the Donbas also is a critical region of Ukraine in terms of the export of grain. Zelensky yesterday is accusing Russia of stealing 500,000 tons of grain from the region so far, because those Ukrainian ports and others export a huge portion of the world's grain. It's known as the breadbasket of Europe. you put it all in context and you can see this is basically where we thought things were going to end up very sadly, which is that this region of Ukraine has been at war since 2014. The Russian invasion and their ambitions have basically retreated to this eastern separatist part. And now a very brutal, long, and grinding war will occur in the region in which both sides are experiencing significant losses. I mean, obviously we don't know how many soldiers have been killed on the Russian side. The NPR reporter here even says you can see the toll that is being taken on the Ukrainians. The hospital is full of wounded soldiers. Some of the younger soldiers that they're speaking to there said that they had only 2 weeks of training in World War II style weapons before they were even thrown to the front line. So the Ukrainians also giving it everything that they got. And of course, the War Brigade here in Washington is outraged over on MSNBC that Biden would not give these missile systems to Ukraine. I mean, first of all, here's the thing. The Brits are actually giving them a very similar type of weapon. So in my mind, yeah, maybe they can step up for once, and we'll get to the Germans and how exactly they're stepping up or lack thereof in terms of their increase in military funding. But second, I mean, it's very clear here that the worst thing we would want is to fuel the idea that this is a US-Russia conflict. And if Russia is going to look at it that way, and then the Ukrainians, were to use our missile systems, maybe even intentionally, and who can blame them if they were to fire on these long-range artillery, which at least some indication some of that is being housed in Russia. That's exactly how you get on the spiral of miscalculation.
Yes, and that's a really important point because Ukrainians have every incentive to draw us directly into this fight. And let's be clear, I mean, this is already a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. The U.S. has been providing not only these weapon systems that we've heard a lot about, but also direct intelligence, which, I mean, that was a bombshell report that our intelligence helped the Ukrainians target some of these high-level Russian military generals and also target that flagship in the Black Sea that was also an incredibly significant loss for the Russians. So we've been supporting them. They've all but said, the Biden administration, that this is effectively a proxy war. They've also been very clear that they don't actually want the war to end. They want it to go on to try to weaken Putin, to try to weaken Russia. I'll tell you in a minute, that is beginning to create some splits within the alliance, actually, the US's posture and the UK's posture versus France and Germany. But your point is really correct because the Ukrainians have every incentive to actually use those long-range weapons to strike within Russia and draw us directly into this conflict. I mean, this is an existential...
And that's rational. Like, we get it.
This is not to slam or to slide. That is the rational calculus and incentive that they have in this situation. We should understand that and know that we have different interest, and our interest is very much not to get drawn directly into this conflict and to maintain some fig leaf of plausible deniability in terms of our involvement here. So, of course, as you say, Biden does one decent thing here and he gets completely smeared and slammed for it by the media. Former Russian ambassador Michael McFaul, who's been just like perpetually wrong and terrible on this entire conflict, he put out some tweet criticizing, goes on MSNBC, he says this is a foolish decision. His plan is, why don't you just get a little agreement with the Ukrainians saying they're not going to use these missiles to fire on Russia? Okay, yeah, like that would reassure absolutely anyone. So he's getting hit for actually making the right decision in this particular instance. I referred earlier to there's a little bit of a split in the alliance in terms of how they are approaching this war at this point. Go ahead and put this next piece up on the screen. So Macron of France and Germany's Olaf Scholz have had a long conversation with Putin, and they actually urged him to hold direct negotiations with Zelensky. Let me read you a little bit of this. So they urged him to hold direct, serious negotiations. That was the quote. It was an 80-minute conversation. The two European leaders insisted on an immediate ceasefire and a withdrawal of Russian troops. Macron and Scholz urged Putin to have serious direct negotiations with the Ukrainian president and find a diplomatic solution to the conflict. As for Zelensky himself, he said he was not, quote, eager for talks, but did add that they would likely be necessary to end the conflict. So you are at a place now where it is conceivable. You can imagine how both sides might have an incentive to come to the table. Now, we're a long way from that actually happening, and there actually being a resolution to this war. But on the Ukrainian side, they're multi-months in. They're sustaining losses in the east. It looks like Russia, in terms of the eastern region, is starting to gain a little bit of ground. They look like they're on the verge of taking the city, Severodonetsk, that I referred to earlier. From Russia's side, they clearly have suffered massive losses. This has not gone the way that they thought whatsoever. They had to actually lift the age that is eligible to even join their military. They're spinning that to their population as, we're going to get these seasoned experts in. No, they're desperate for more manpower because of how many have been killed in this war. They've had to admit to their population that these young conscripts have in fact been sent to fight and die, something that they denied at the beginning. So they've taken on major losses. You can imagine a situation where Putin is able to take Severodonetsk and then is able to spin that as a win to his people and maybe potentially come to the negotiating table to end this thing. Like I said, we're a long way from that. But you can see how France and Germany pushing in that direction of let's actually try to get to a peace. Meanwhile, the U.S. is very much on the other side of that and has made it clear in multiple statements their interest in keeping this conflict going. What does that mean? That means more death and destruction of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people.
Well, and unfortunately, the British are really on that side too.
That's
there
right.
really is a real split inside of NATO, kind of with the Anglosphere and then the rest of continental Europe. Let's put this next one up there on the screen, which is about how the Biden administration has apparently been telling Ukraine, you're like, hey, there's a real danger of escalation if you strike deep inside of Russia. The US and diplomatic officials are leaking that to Reuters. And look, this is exactly why inside that $44 billion package, one of the things I warned about is that buried inside of it was a complete discretion on the part of the president to give whatever weapon system that he wants to the Ukrainians, including, and look, he made the right decision this time. He's 80 years old. What if he drops dead tomorrow? Now Kamala Harris is president. Do you have confidence in her ability, which is now enshrined in law in order to determine whatever the Ukrainians get on the battlefield? And what they point to, look, the Russians are not dumb. So they're like, okay, we're fighting in East, so we'll just store our long-range systems in Russia and fire it from there.
Yeah.
And then if the Ukrainians use U.S. arms, then we have a pretext in order to have escalation. And also, there's a rational decision on everybody's part when it happens. So then we have to consider, what does that mean for us? And we're seeing that the more that we give them long-range weaponry, including long-range howitzers and more, what are we seeing? Which is that we have to give and get some sort of verbal agreement on their part that they won't do it. Look, even if the president, Zelensky, agrees to that, how can you ensure that Zelensky's order will go down to the general and then down to the field commander and then down to the individual who has to pull the trigger all the way at like the non-commissioned officer level? All of that means that you're gonna have a tremendous amount of command and control and over that military, which we already know is full of conscripts. And then also, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be some rogue person who's in charge. And again, totally understandable. You're like, hey, we need to kill the enemy is killing us. They're firing from Russia, we should hit them in Russia. But of course, that has bigger strategic implications. So just look, it's a high balancing act. And I think we're really entering the kind of Syrian civil war type of this level of this conflict where we are years away, unfortunately, I think, from any sort of actual resolution here. And a absolutely brutal and savage campaign is about to happen over the extended period of time. A lot of people are going to die, Ukrainians and Russians as well. And the way that we consider how these weapon systems are being used is going to require a lot of thought so that 5 years from now, things don't come back to bite us in the ass, just like they did in Syria, just like they did in Libya, just like, I can go all the way down the list.
Yeah, that's right. There's one other thing that that I want to say about this, which is that this is a region that, of course, has been at war for years now, not quite on the level that they're experiencing now. You see the pictures and the video that is coming out of the Donbas. These cities are just, they're just destroyed. It's just rubble. There's no one left. Everyone that could flee did flee. It's incredibly, incredibly sad. And, a lot of people in that region, I saw interviews and I saw a little bit of sort of rough public sentiment polling. The plurality view was basically, we don't even care whether it's Ukraine or Russia. We just want this to be over. Yeah. And I think it's important to lift up that sentiment because, again, listen, I agree with you. Probably where we're headed is a long, brutal stalemate with the continued just utter decimation of this entire region. But if there is any chance to come to the table, negotiate a peace, the direction that France and Germany have now put themselves on the side of, we all ought to be urging for that sort of peaceful resolution, which is in the best interests of the U.S., in the best interests of the world, and in the best interests of the Ukrainian people as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.